You're listening to the Armin van Buuren guest mix here on Group Therapy Radio with us above and beyond.
artificial intelligence. artificial intelligence. Release yourself.
Destination, your destination, your destination, your destination.
What a banging guest mix from Armin van Buuren there. Thanks so much. And thanks for backing in all of those IDs as well. But that's all from us this week. If you want to catch this episode of ABGT alongside any previous ones, head on over to your streaming service of choice. Jono's taking over the reins next week, and he'll be joined by a familiar name, Blau, on the guest mix. So for now, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me too.
Group therapy with Above and Beyond.
Ontario is open for business.
The real estate market has gone crazy.
He said, if you don't like it, move out.
Labor costs and the price of construction materials have increased.
Predominantly, our housing supply comes through some form of investment and profit seeking.
More profit from every single unit that they own.
There's no doubt that the cost of living associated with rent is becoming very serious indeed.
We hear a lot of this when it comes to the rental market.
We're going to continue building homes to make them affordable.
Financial investment in housing.
Crack down on rent evictions.
Rent control.
Purpose-built rentals.
Purpose-built rental.
To get more affordable housing.
Financialization.
Zoning.
Raise density.
Politicians, advocates, and experts use them to explain the pain points Canadians are facing when it comes to housing, especially in its biggest city, Toronto. So I spoke to a few people, and they help make sense of why these terms matter so much right now.
The real estate market has gone crazy.
Housing affordability.
Ensure that affordable housing gets built.
Affordable housing.
Housing affordability. It's the reason why we're making this video. What's affordable for you may be different than what's affordable for someone else. Economists and experts generally consider something affordable if it costs less than 30% of the household's before tax income. But the reality is people are spending more than that to put a roof over their head.
This was a benchmark that was put into place decades ago as reasonable and affordable. But we've been so unreasonable, so unaffordable for so long that it is more realistic that people are trying to avoid spending half of their income on housing, and some are spending more than that just to be able to have a decent place to live.
Let's look at Toronto. With an average rent of just over $2,600 for a one-bedroom unit, you'd need to earn $100,000 a year for that to be considered affordable. So affordability already feels out of reach for a lot of Torontonians. But here's the scary thing. It's expected to get even worse.
In not so long, seeing an average monthly rent of $3,000 a month. And, after that, it's going to be, $3,500 a month, and then eventually $4,000 a month. And the question is, who can afford these rents? Because the average household simply can't.
So as a place to call home that you can actually afford gets harder and harder to find, expect more and more people to be talking about this.
Rent control. Rent control. Rent controls.
There's no doubt that the cost of living associated with rent is becoming very serious indeed.
No rent! Rent control. It's been a contentious debate for years. Advocates say it protects renters from huge increases. Developers say rent control makes it harder to build. The less money you can make from a rental building, the less likely you are to build. But some experts say we need rent control now more than ever.
Rent control is absolutely critical right now. And don't forget the larger picture. If you've got less income, but your rent's going up and your food price is going up 3 times the pace of headline inflation, something's got to give. And so rent control becomes like a necessity to make sure we don't have more people that are basically evicted and or underhoused and hungry.
Rent control does many things. It helps to provide a level of predictability in terms of what your rent is going to be. Rent control also ensures that we have better stability in our communities, that we don't have folks that are constantly in flux where once the rent becomes unaffordable, they're moving to another community.
Here's the thing, this debate is more complicated than just rent control or no rent control. How it's applied makes a huge difference to renters. And most of the time, rent control isn't a blanket policy that applies to every building or tenant. For example, for years, rent control in Toronto only applied to buildings constructed before 1991. And right now, if you've lived in your unit since before November 2018, rent control applies to you. But if you move, your landlord can charge whatever they want for the unit. There's actually a term for this. It's called vacancy decontrol.
Part of what I think vacancy decontrol does, it undermines rent control because it gives you the impression or the illusion that it's rent control that's causing rents to go up.
This concept is really important because there's a huge incentive for some landlords to pressure their tenants out. One of the ways that happens is renoviction, kicking a tenant out to renovate an apartment and then putting it back on the market for much higher rent. So that's why you'll be hearing a lot about rent control, but expect specific policy to matter here. In the meantime, the lowest rents you'll find are likely in one of these.
Purpose-built rentals.
Purpose-built rental.
Purpose-built rental apartments.
Purpose-built rentals, it's just what it sounds like. A building where people rent units, often managed by a company. And that is different from a condo building where you rent from an individual owner. There are a few pros of living in purpose-built rentals. It's more secure than renting from a condo owner who can kick out a tenant to sell their unit or move in. Purpose-built rentals also tend to have less amenities, and that makes rent a little bit cheaper. We used to build lots of dedicated rentals back in the 60s.
The phenomenal increase in the number of apartment buildings.
But we actually haven't been building dedicated rental for the last 40 years. Most new rental units come from the condo market. Now, lots of people talk about building purpose-built rentals as a solution to beef up the rental supply for places like Toronto, but the reality is we're not building them fast enough.
Constructing purpose-built rentals in Toronto seems to be a challenge compared to other Canadian cities.
We're going to see a shortfall of like 170,000 units, and that's under a pretty optimistic scenario for rental developments. It's pretty clear we need to do something to ramp up that level of construction and do it now.
So building more is a big part of the conversation around rentals, but how we build is also part of the issue.
Higher density, gentle density.
Medium or high density housing.
So in housing terms, density is a measure of the number of units given in an area. It's the difference between taking one lot of land and building one single family home, a series of townhouses, or a high-rise building. With a growing population in Toronto and only a finite amount of space, some experts say we should be using existing land to build as many units as possible.
Raise density targets, basically everywhere, particularly around transit, but basically in all central areas of the city.
But you can't just build whatever you want, wherever you want, and that's because of a type of regulation called zoning. Zoning bylaws determine what you can build and where.
Zoning is too restrictive. What we've seen over the last 40 years is more regulation. It's much more difficult to intensify when you're outside of certain areas of the city to build apartment buildings.
Some parcels of land are zoned only for single-family homes, meaning even if a developer or property owner wanted to increase density, they legally could not. But in early 2023, Toronto City Council changed zoning laws to approve 3- and 4-unit multiplexes across the city.
We think this is a step in the right direction, but obviously we know we need to go further.
But not everyone is happy about zoning changes. Ever heard this term? NIMBY. It stands for not in my backyard. Turns out lots of people who live in single-family lots don't want apartment buildings built next door. Now, there's another piece to this rental puzzle, and it has to do with how you think about housing fundamentally.
Predominantly, our housing supply comes through some form of investment and profit seeking.
Financialization.
Financialization.
That phenomenon where housing is increasingly thought of as a vehicle for building wealth is also called financialization. And it's one thing for individuals to invest in 1 or 2 rental properties, but there's something beyond that happening in Toronto.
What's different about these types of entity is the scale. These entities are not acquiring, 1 or 2 units. These entities are looking to acquire 200 to anywhere north of 500 to 800 units in one transaction. These entities are looking to acquire units en masse.
And once they've bought them, some of these investors are looking to make as much money as they can off of these units.
It is part of the business model because what they're trying to do is squeeze more profit from every single unit that they own. I mean, it's really quite incredible. They have projections of how much they can charge and how much they can increase the rents for every unit in every building.
The challenge is that, while we're trying to maintain affordability, a lot of these entities have a legal and fiduciary responsibilities to maximize